Hi everyone! Today we're diving into one of the most fascinating topics in developmental psychology, how we grow and develop from the very beginning of life, even before we're born. It's a journey that starts at conception and continues through infancy. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear understanding of prenatal development and the newborn's incredible capabilities. Our story begins with one of nature's most intricate and miraculous processes, conception. This is where the tiniest building blocks of life come together to form the foundation for an entire human being. Picture this. Out of 200 million sperm that begin the journey, only one has what it takes to penetrate the egg's outer shell, which is a protective layer, also known as the zona pellucida. When this happens, the sperm's nucleus fuses with the egg's nucleus, and a zygote is formed, which is a single cell that marks the start of your life. So this diagram depicts the structures of a human egg, which is also known as an ovum, and a human sperm, which is also known as spermatozoa. These are both two essential components in human reproduction, and here is a breakdown of their parts. So you can see that both have a nucleus, which contains the haploid DNA, or half the genetic material needed for a human being. And you can see that the ovum has a lot of cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is the bulk of the egg and contains the nutrients and organelles needed to support the zygote after fertilization. There's the cortical granules, which are vesicles near the plasma membrane that prevent polyspermy. Polyspermy is the entry of multiple sperm after the initial fertilization, and this occurs by hardening the zona pellucida, which is this jelly coat that we just spoke about. It's a glycoprotein layer that surrounds the egg, and it protects it while also facilitating sperm binding. And then for the sperm, it also contains, as we just said, the haploid DNA in this nucleus. And then this head is streamlined to basically just penetrate the egg. And then this mid piece contains the mitochondria, which provides the energy for the sperm to swim towards the egg. You can see here that there's a tail, also known as a flagella, which is a whip-like structure, and it basically helps enable motility and allowing the sperm to travel through the female reproductive tract. And there's also centrioles, which are essential for forming spindles during the process of mitosis. Another very important fact to notice, it's not very evident by this diagram, but the egg is significantly larger than the sperm, about 10,000 times larger, in fact. And that's because it contains the resources needed to sustain the early stages of embryonic development. And you can notice that this sperm is optimized for motility and developing the genetic material to the egg. So that's why we have so many mitochondria. Once the zygote is formed, it contains a full set of genetic instructions, as we said, half from the mother and half from the father. These instructions, which are encoded in the DNA, will dictate every part of development, from hair to eye color and eye shape to personality traits and potential health risks. Within just 24 hours of fertilization, the single cell begins to divide, forming 2 cells, then 4, then 8, and so on. This rapid process of cell division is known as mitosis, and it's the starting point of the complexity in life. Over the next few days, the dividing cell forms a hollow structure called a blastocyst, which is preparing to implant itself into the uterine wall. So this here is the zygote. It's honestly pretty amazing to think that this small collection of tiny cells holds the blueprint for what eventually becomes a 100 trillion cell human being. So this moment of creation is pretty awe-inspiring because it just shows how intricate and resilient life really is. And here's the zygote, and you can see the cytoplasm and the 2 pronuclei, as well as the zona pellucida. Once conception starts, the process of prenatal development unfolds in 3 stages. The germinal stage, which is the first 2 weeks, then the embryonic stage, which is weeks 2 to 8, and then the fetal stage, which is from weeks 9 to birth. Each stage plays a critical role in shaping the growth and development of a baby. So let's explore them in depth. First off is the germinal stage, which begins right at conception and lasts until about 2 weeks later, as we just said. So during this time, the zygote travels down the fallopian tube toward the uterus. Along the way, it continues to divide, forming a cluster of cells. By the time it reaches the uterus, the zygote has become a blastocyst, which is this. It's a hollow ball of cells that eventually forms both the embryo and the supporting structures like the placenta. So that's what we were discussing earlier. If you're unfamiliar with what a blastocyst is, so in this diagram we can see that there's the zona pellucida, which we've said multiple times is the outer protective layer that helps basically keep this blastocyst safe and prevents it from implanting too early. Then there's the trophoblast, which is outer cells on the blastocyst that help attach to the uterus and also form the placenta. So it helps deliver nutrients to the eventual fetus. There's the blastocele, which is a fluid-filled space inside the blastocyst, and it provides room for cells to grow and develop. And lastly, there's the embryoblast, which is a group of cells inside the blastocyst that eventually grows into the baby and the embryo. So once the blastocyst reaches the uterine lining, it undergoes a process known as implantation. Implantation ensures that the developing embryo can receive nutrients and oxygen from the mother's blood supply. However, this stage is also incredibly delicate. In fact, fewer than half of all fertilized eggs successfully complete the germinal stage. If implantation fails, the zygote will not develop further, highlighting just how fragile this early period can be. By the 3rd week, the blastocyst has implanted. And from this point on, it's basically considered an embryo. This stage is characterized by rapid development of major organs and body systems. During this time, the heart begins to beat, the brain begins to form, and the spinal cord takes shape. So here you can see like the difference between the germinal stage, which is what we just talked about, and the embryonic stage. You can see the development of the brain and the beginning of the development of the spine. The process of organogenesis, which is organ formation, begins to start, and by the end of this stage, the embryo has a recognizable head, torso, and then budding limbs. So we'll see a video of this in a little bit. A particularly fascinating aspect of the embryonic stage is cell differentiation. In this process, the cells in the embryo decide their specific roles. For example, some will become nerve cells, while others will form muscle tissue or blood vessels. This differentiation ensures that all complex systems of the body are built correctly. However, because so much critical development occurs during this stage, the embryo is particularly vulnerable to harmful influences like toxins, infections, and poor maternal health. So if you're looking to go into like surgery at some point, or you're doing research on stem cells, this concept of cell differentiation is super vital to that, as well as just the overall idea of cells specializing into different functions. Then there's the fetal stage, which is from weeks 9 onward. During this time, the embryo becomes a fetus and its growth accelerates dramatically. The fetus now looks unmistakably human, and we'll see that in a second. It has fully developed arms, legs, and facial features. So you'll see that there's basically like a face almost. Organs like the heart, lungs, and kidneys continue to mature and prepare the baby for life outside the womb. One of the most remarkable changes during this time is the development of the brain. So by the end of this fetal stage, the brain has grown to the point where the baby can recognize sounds, respond to touch, and even exhibit behaviors like thumb sucking. The fetus also gains significant weight during the last few months, and basically this allows, this is the time period where fat stores necessary for survival after birth are built. And here we're going to see a video from the 2nd stage and the 3rd stage. So I don't think this video has the germinal stage, but we'll see from the embryo onward going into the fetal stage. So you can see the budding of these limbs, the creation of the placenta to give nutrients to the developing fetus, and you can see the creation, how their face almost becomes recognizable, as well as fully developed organs, a developed brain, and yes. So basically, you can see that by that point, there are remarkable changes in the development of the baby as a whole. But development isn't just about genetics and biological processes. The environment plays a huge role, particularly during the prenatal period. External factors known as teratogens can have a significant impact on a baby's development, and sometimes it can have lifelong consequences. Teratogens are substances or environmental factors that can disrupt normal development in a growing baby. This can include drugs, alcohol, certain medications, and even infections like rubella. And even environmental pollutants, in fact. Stress can also act as an environmental influence, and high levels of maternal stress have been associated with increased cortisol exposure for the fetus. And cortisol, if you don't know, is basically the hormone related with stress. And this can really, truly affect brain development and increase the risk of behavioral issues later in life. However, the good news is that proper prenatal care, including a healthy diet, regular checkups, and avoiding harmful substances can improve outcomes for both the mother and the baby. So one of the most well-known examples is alcohol, which can lead to FAS, or fetal alcohol syndrome. This condition is characterized by physical abnormalities such as a small head, thin upper lips, as well as cognitive impairments. So this is a child with fetal alcohol syndrome. It's very cute. Not the disease, obviously, but the child. What's especially concerning is that even light or moderate drinking can have these developmental issues during pregnancy. And here are some videos, and if you search it up, you'll find many articles about this, where there are children who become drug dependent even before they're born, and that's obviously like an awful circumstance. And the CDC suggests that up to 1 in 20 U.S. school-age children may have FAS, so fetal alcohol syndrome. Another important thing to note is that the placenta, which connects the mother and the fetus, we saw it earlier in the video, it acts as a protective barrier by filtering out many harmful substances, but it's not foolproof. So, for example, smoking during pregnancy, it can reduce oxygen levels in the blood, leading to low birth weight and an increased risk of premature birth. And drugs like heroin and cocaine can cause severe withdrawal symptoms in newborns and also increase the risk of developmental delays. And although the placenta is trying to filter out those harmful substances, it's not able to filter out everything. And that's why these disorders can occur. Now that we've covered the incredible journey of prenatal development, let's talk about what happens after birth. Did you know that newborns come into the world equipped with some pretty amazing abilities? They have reflexes and sensory capabilities that aren't just random, but they're pretty necessary, they're essential for survival and development from day one. In other words, they're hardwired and don't require learning. They're also, you can also use them as tests to make sure that a child is developing well. So if you have like a child or a little baby brother or sister, you can test these things. So first off is the rooting reflex, which is one of the signs of innate intelligence. When you touch a baby's cheek, they'll instinctively turn their head towards the touch, and they'll prepare to latch on. And that's because it's a built-in reflex to prepare latching onto a nipple or a bottle for feeding. So this isn't something they have to learn, it's hardwired into them from birth. Then there's the sucking reflex, which is another essential tool for survival. Babies are born knowing how to suck and coordinate their breathing at the same time. This reflex ensures that they can feed effectively without choking. So although this may seem really simple, it represents a remarkable coordination of muscles and nerves that have developed over months in the womb. So this just shows how complex the baby is and how sometimes we do take that for granted. There's also the grasping reflex, which is when you place your finger in a newborn's palm, as you can see here, they'll automatically close their hand around it. They're also using their senses, as we said earlier. They can recognize their mother's voice just hours after birth, and they've been listening to the muffled voices in the womb for weeks. So this really helps the newborn with bonding and familiarity. So this this chart here shows the rooting reflex, which is turning towards touch or stimulus. Here's the sucking reflex, and then here's the grasping reflex. There are many other reflexes, but these are the three that are covered in the textbook, so these are the three that I put here. One of the most intriguing discoveries about newborns is their preference for faces. Studies have shown that even a few hours after birth, babies will spend more time looking at face-like images compared to non-face-like images. So for example, this is taken from figure 5.4 in the textbook, and it shows how newborns consistently preferred images resembling faces over other patterns. This preference for faces helps babies connect with their caregivers, laying the foundation for emotional and social development. So just to elaborate a little bit more on what this figure is, when shown these two stimuli, which contain the same elements basically, Italian newborns in a study spent nearly twice as much time looking at the face-like images as opposed to the non-face-like images. Now, let's take this a step further. Did you know that researchers have developed ingenious ways to study what babies are thinking? Even though they can't talk, newborns and young infants have shown us just how much they can learn and remember about the world around them. One of the most fascinating studies in the field of infant learning involves the concept of novelty preference. So the concept of novelty preference basically just suggests that even though newborns and young infants can't talk, they show us how much they can learn about the world around them. So researchers in these experiments will present infants with two images, one familiar and one novel. The time the baby spends looking at each image tells us a lot, and what they recognize about them and what interests them. So for example, this is taken from figure 5.3 in the textbook, which shows a hybrid image of a cat's body with a dog's head. So in these experiments, babies are given a series of images of cats, and then they'll switch one up and then put a dog's head on them. So babies who've previously seen these images of cats will spend more time looking at this hybrid image, which suggests that they can recognize something new and different about it. This experiment also reveals that even at a few months old, infants are capable of distinguishing between categories of objects. They are not just passively observing the world, but they're actively processing information, categorizing it, and remembering it. Think about how incredible that is. A baby, just a few months old, is already building the cognitive tools they'll use for learning later in life. So you began categorizing at such a young age. Another key insight comes from studying habituation, which is the idea that babies lose interest in stimuli after they've seen them repeatedly. So for example, if you gave the same baby the same toy over and over again, their attention will start to drift. But when something new is introduced, their interest is renewed. This shows us that babies not only recognize changes in their environment, but are also naturally curious and constantly seek to learn more. So I think a big takeaway from this is that babies are far, far, far more competent and curious than we often give them credit for, and far more far more active in observing the world than we often realize. So now we're going to go over some questions that hopefully help reiterate some of the topics we've spoken about throughout this presentation. So the first fill in the blank says, conception begins when a woman's blank releases a mature blank. The correct answer is, conception begins when a woman's ovary releases a mature egg or ovum. As soon as one sperm penetrates the egg surface blank all other sperm? The correct answer is, as soon as one sperm penetrates the egg's surface blocks all the other sperm. And if you can remember, the part of the egg that does that is the cortical granule. Next up, the egg and sperm blank, fuse, and become one. This one's a little bit trickier, but the answer is that the egg and sperm nuclei fuse and become one. With their haploid DNA, it allows them to have all the genetic information for the development of a baby. About 10 days after conception, the fertilized egg attaches to the mother's blank wall. About 10 days after conception, the fertilized egg attaches to the mother's uterine wall. The outer cells of the embryo become the blank, which transfers blank and blank from mother to fetus. And the correct answer is the outer cells of the embryo become the placenta, which transfers nutrients and oxygen from mother to fetus. And this is what leads to the issue of teratogens. Along with nutrients, a range of harmful substances known as blank can pass through the placenta. Along with nutrients, a range of harmful substances known as teratogens can pass through the placenta. And then lastly, if a mother drinks heavily, her baby is at risk for the birth defects that accompany blank. If a mother drinks heavily, her baby is at risk for the birth defects that accompany fetal alcohol syndrome, or FAS. When an infant's cheek is touched, it will vigorously blank for a nipple. Other infant reflexes include blank, 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 and blank. So this first one is the root reflex. Then there is also sucking, swallowing, and a few more are tonguing and breathing. Or you could say something like the Moro reflex, or some of the many other reflexes. There's not just 5. But to recap, from the fusion of a single sperm and egg to the incredible abilities of the newborn, which we talked about in this chapter, the journey of life is pretty amazing. I hope that's something you can take away from this presentation. Thank you for joining me on